My daughter-in-law called me a fat pig at her wedding. In front of her giggling bridesmaids, her sneering cousins, and the father who had unknowingly signed his entire life over to me just 1 week prior. She had no idea she was speaking to the woman who now owned her family's past, present, and every last second of their future. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been judged by your appearance or made to feel small, then you know the cold fire that moment lit inside of me. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I turned that fire into an inferno that not only burned down their world of privilege but forged my own peace from the ashes. Hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house when you're the only one awake. It was my favorite time of day. 5 a.m., with the world still draped in a soft blue-gray light and the only sound being the gentle hum of the refrigerator. In that stillness, I wasn't Helen Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Holdings, the invisible force behind half the city's major commercial real estate. I was just Helen, a 62-year-old woman with a fondness for Earl Grey tea and the comfortable weight of a well-loved novel in my hands. That morning, the morning of my son's wedding, the quiet felt different. It was charged with a nervous energy, a thrumming anticipation that had my stomach in a gentle knot. My son, Michael. My only child. The one good thing that came from a marriage that had otherwise been a business arrangement with a man who loved ambition more than he ever loved me. Michael was my world. He had my late husband's charming smile, but my eyes, emerald green, though his were filled with a youthful optimism I'd long since traded for pragmatism. I had built my empire from the dirt up. I started with a secretarial job, saving every penny, my evenings spent studying accounting and market trends. I bought my first dilapidated duplex at 25, renovating it with my own 2 hands, my knuckles raw and my back aching. While other women were planning parties, I was planning acquisitions. I learned that in the world of men and money, being a quiet, unassuming woman was a superpower. They never saw you coming. I built my wealth in silence, brick by invisible brick, until I had a fortress. But from the outside, all people saw was a simple, silver-haired widow in a sensible cardigan. I preferred it that way. My wealth was my business. My son was my heart. And my heart was about to be officially handed over to Amanda Carson. Amanda was polished. That was the best word for her. Every blonde hair was perfectly placed, every nail flawlessly manicured, her laughter a carefully calibrated tinkle that seemed designed to charm. She came from old money, or so she claimed. The Carsons had a name in the city, a name associated with a manufacturing company, Carson Industries, that had been a local powerhouse decades ago. They lived in a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive suburb, drove luxury cars, and vacationed in places I only read about in glossy magazines. But I knew things. I knew that the polish was a thin veneer over rotting wood. In my world, numbers didn't lie, and the numbers on Carson Industries told a story of catastrophic debt, of mismanagement, of a family living on borrowed time and rapidly dwindling credit. They were a house of cards in a hurricane, and they didn't even seem to feel the wind. Michael was smitten. He saw Amanda's confidence as strength, her extravagance as a sign of success. He was a kind, gentle soul who worked in the non-profit sector, and I think a part of him was dazzled by her world. I tried to voice my concerns, gently. Once, over our weekly dinner, I'd broached the subject. She just seems to value appearances so much, honey, I'd said, stirring my soup. Michael had put his fork down, a familiar defensive line forming between his brows. Mom, she's from a different background. That's just how her family is. They're proud of what they've built. What their grandfathers built, I'd thought, but didn't say. Out loud, I just smiled. Of course. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. Because what else could I say? He was a grown man. To push further would be to risk pushing him away, and that was a price I would never be willing to pay. So I wrote the checks. A staggering amount for the wedding venue, a historic estate with fountains and manicured gardens. A small fortune for the catering, the flowers, the 10-piece band. Amanda's parents, Richard and Eleanor Carson, had pleaded poverty, claiming their assets were tied up. I knew the truth. Their assets were non-existent. But for Michael's happiness, I paid. I was an investor in my son's joy, and I considered it money well spent. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and painfully beautiful. I chose my dress with care. It was a custom-made, deep forest green silk dress. Simple, elegant, with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It wasn't flashy. It was designed to complement, not to command attention. My only jewelry was a pair of pearl earrings Michael had given me for my 60th birthday. I felt a quiet confidence as my driver pulled up to the estate. The sun was glinting off the ridiculous number of imported cars in the valet line. I saw Amanda's parents greeting guests near the grand entrance, Richard puffed up like a proud rooster in his tuxedo, Eleanor dripping in diamonds that I suspected were financed by the last of their credit. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and stepped out of the car. My heart was full. This was it. The day my son started his own family. I found Michael in the groom's suite. He looked so handsome it made my chest ache. He hugged me tightly, smelling of cologne and nervous excitement. "Mom, you look beautiful," he whispered into my hair. "Not as beautiful as the bride will, I'm sure," I said, smiling. "Are you ready for this?" He nodded, his eyes shining. More than ready. That moment was perfect. A small, perfect pearl of a memory. It was the last one I would have from that day. After the ceremony, which was as opulent and impersonal as I had expected, the guests flooded into the grand ballroom for the reception. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling. Tables were groaning under the weight of towering floral arrangements. It was a spectacle. A performance. Amanda was holding court near the champagne fountain, a vision in white lace and tulle. Her bridal party, a flock of identically polished young women, surrounded her. I approached, my smile genuine, ready to offer my congratulations, to welcome her officially into our little family. She saw me coming. Her perfectly painted lips tightened for a fraction of a second before stretching into a wide, brilliant smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "Helen," she chirped, her voice loud enough to carry. She took my hands in her icy grip. "Everyone, this is Michael's mother." She turned to her bridesmaids, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was deliberately, precisely, meant for me and everyone within a 10-foot radius to hear. "This is the fat pig we have to put up with now." The world stopped. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the distant melody of the string quartet, it all faded into a dull, roaring silence in my ears. The air felt thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. Her words hung there, shimmering with venom. "Fat pig. I am not a thin woman. I have the soft, comfortable body of a woman who has worked hard, eaten well, and passed her 60th birthday. I had never, in my life, considered my body to be a source of shame. It was strong. It had carried me through 80-hour work weeks, through grief, through raising a son on my own. It was my own. But in that moment, under the weight of her sneer and the stifled giggles of her friends, I felt a hot, unfamiliar shame crawl up my neck. My cheeks burned as if I'd been slapped. I could feel the glances. Quick, curious, pitying. I saw two of Amanda's cousins look me up and down, a shared smirk passing between them. My simple, elegant dress suddenly felt cheap and ill-fitting. The pearls on my ears felt like lead weights. I was exposed, judged, and condemned in a single brutal sentence. Years of boardroom negotiations, of facing down condescending old men who thought I was just a secretary, had taught me to control my expression. I held Amanda's gaze. My face remained a mask of polite neutrality. My heart, however, was a different story. It felt like a frantic bird trapped in my ribs, beating itself bloody against the bone. I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, is a mirror. It forces people to see their own ugliness reflected back at them. But Amanda wasn't finished. She clearly mistook my silence for weakness. She tucked her arm through mine, her grip surprisingly strong, and began to parade me around her family's inner circle. It was a victory lap. "Aunt Carol, have you met Helen? Michael's mother," she'd say, with a pointed emphasis on mother, as if it were a quaint, slightly embarrassing title. Aunt Carol, a woman with a face so tight it looked painful, gave me a dismissive glance. "Oh, how nice." Her eyes flickered over my dress. "Did you make that yourself?" The laughter was light, but it cut just as deep. Another cousin, a young man with slicked back hair and an arrogant pout, chuckled. Is that really his mother? She doesn't exactly look like she belongs here, does she? Each comment was a fresh wound. Each laugh, a twist of the knife. And through it all, Amanda smiled, her grip on my arm a constant, proprietary reminder of my humiliation. My son was across the room, laughing with his groomsmen, completely oblivious. He was in his own bubble of joy, and I was adrift in a sea of cruelty, utterly alone. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were watching this happen to someone else, a sad, frumpy woman on a television screen. But I was not sad. I was not frumpy. I was Helen Sterling. And the core of steel that I had forged over a lifetime of struggle began to harden. The shock was receding, replaced by a slow, cold burn. A clarity so sharp it was almost painful. I was scanning the crowd, looking for an escape, when I saw him. Richard Carson, Amanda's father. He was making his way toward us, a triumphant, smug expression on his face. He had a glass of scotch in one hand, and he moved with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he was king of the castle. He was coming to add his own insult to the pile, to put the finishing touch on his daughter's masterpiece of cruelty. He was 10 feet away. Then 5. He raised his glass in a mock toast, his lips already curling into a condescending smile, ready to deliver the final killing blow. He opened his mouth to speak. And it was then, right at that moment, that everything was about to change. Not just for him, but for all of them. He just didn't know it yet. Part 2. The Weight of Silence. Richard Carson stopped in front of me, his posture reeking of paternalistic condescension. The scent of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction rolled off him in waves. He looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal designed to diminish, to categorize me as other. He was about to speak, to land his verbal punchline and earn a chuckle from the circling sharks that were his relatives. I braced myself. So, he began, his voice a low, rumbling sneer. You're the mother. I have to say, Michael never mentioned his family was so rustic. His eyes met mine. And in that instant, I saw not a flicker of recognition. To him, I was a nameless, faceless, dowdy woman in a simple green dress. I was not Helen Sterling, the investor whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the city's financial district. I was just an obstacle, a piece of undesirable background scenery at his daughter's perfect party. The word rustic hung in the air, another calculated insult. It implied I was unsophisticated, common, from the dirt. And in a way, he was right. I had come from dirt. But I had learned how to make things grow. He, on the other hand, had inherited a garden and let it turn to dust. Instead of reacting to the insult, I tilted my head slightly. A small, polite smile touched my lips, a smile I had perfected over decades of dealing with men exactly like him. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Richard, I said, my voice calm and even. Velvet over steel. I do hope you'll enjoy the evening. It's so important to appreciate these moments of celebration. You never know when things might change. It was cryptic, meaningless to him, but a quiet promise to myself. He blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. The line wasn't the joke he was expecting. It wasn't the reaction he wanted. Thrown off balance, he just grunted, took a sip of his scotch, and moved on, rejoining his circle, leaving me in the wake of his arrogance. Amanda, seeing her father's work was done, finally released my arm. She gave me one last, triumphant smirk before flitting away to bask in the adoration of her guests. The rest of the wedding reception was a masterclass in endurance. I found a small table near the back of the ballroom, partially hidden by a potted ficus, and made it my sanctuary. From there, I watched. I watched my son, my dear, sweet, oblivious Michael, dance his first dance with a woman who had just filleted my soul. He looked at her with such adoration, such unadulterated love, it was like a physical blow. How could he not see the coldness in her eyes? How could he not feel the brittle cruelty that lay just beneath her flawless skin? During the toasts, Richard Carson stood up, glass in hand. He spoke at length about family, about legacy, about the importance of good breeding. He thanked me, in a cursory, dismissive tone, for providing the raw materials for such a fine young man. The implication was clear. Michael was a lump of clay that their family, the Carsons, would now mold into something worthy. Several of their relatives tittered with laughter. I took a slow sip of ice water, the cold glass a welcome anchor in the swirling heat of my anger. I didn't look at them. I focused on the intricate pattern of the tablecloth, tracing it with my eyes, channeling my rage into a single, focused point of ice-cold resolve. The drive home was silent. My driver, a kind man named George who had been with me for 15 years, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. He had seen me leave the estate alone, my shoulders a little less straight than when I had arrived. "Was it a lovely wedding, Miss Sterling?" he asked gently. "It was very illuminating, George," I replied, my voice flat. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in my large empty bed, the luxurious sheets feeling like sandpaper against my skin. The words echoed in the darkness. "Fat pig. Rustic. Doesn't belong here." They weren't just insults anymore. They were indictments. In their eyes, my life's work, my discipline, my success, it meant nothing. Because I didn't wear the right clothes, have the right name, or possess the right kind of slender, manicured emptiness. All my accomplishments were invisible to them, erased by the simple fact of my appearance. The next few days were a blur of quiet misery. A heavy, gray blanket of humiliation seemed to have settled over me, muffling the world. I'd find myself staring into space in the middle of a meeting, the voices of my executive team fading into a dull hum as Amanda's whisper echoed in my mind. I tried to talk to Michael. He and Amanda were on their honeymoon, some ridiculously expensive island in the Maldives. I waited until they returned. He came over for dinner the following week, alone. Amanda was exhausted and needed to unpack. I made his favorite meal, pot roast, the familiar aroma usually a source of comfort. Tonight, it just filled the kitchen with a sense of forced normalcy. We ate in silence for a few minutes before I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Michael," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk about the wedding." He sighed, a weary, put-upon sound that instantly set my teeth on edge. "Mom, please. Let's not." "No, we have to," I insisted, my voice gaining strength. "Amanda was very unkind to me." He pushed his carrots around his plate. "What are you talking about?" "She was a little stressed, that's all. It was a huge day for her." "Stressed?" "Michael, she called me a fat pig. In front of her friends." He finally looked at me, but his eyes were filled with exasperation, not sympathy. "Oh, Mom. You're being too sensitive. It was probably just a stupid joke. You know how those girls are. It's just locker room talk or whatever they call it." Locker room talk. The dismissal, the casual invalidation of my feelings, was in some ways worse than the original insult. It was a betrayal. My own son, siding with her, telling me that my pain was an overreaction. And her father, I pressed on, my voice dangerously quiet. He called me rustic. The entire family spent the night whispering and laughing at me. "Did you not see any of that?" "I was a little busy, Mom, you know, getting married," he said, his voice rising. "Look, Amanda's family is. They're very direct. They're not like us. It's a different culture. You just have to get used to them. For my sake, can you please just try to get along?" For his sake. He was asking me to absorb their cruelty, to make myself small, to accept their disrespect, all for the sake of his marital bliss. In that moment, something inside me broke. The soft, maternal part of me that was willing to forgive anything for my son's happiness receded, and the cold, pragmatic CEO took its place. I saw the situation for what it was, a bad investment. I had poured my love, my money, and my hope into his happiness, and the return was this, a demand that I quietly accept humiliation. I ended the dinner politely. I didn't argue further. I simply nodded, cleared the plates, and kissed him goodbye at the door, a hollow ache in my chest. He was lost to me, blinded by a love that demanded he be blind to everything else. I was on my own. That night, I didn't go to bed. I went to my home office. The room was my command center, paneled in dark cherry wood, with one wall made entirely of glass, overlooking the city lights. I sat in my leather chair, the silence a welcome comfort. The problem was clear. Direct confrontation had failed. An emotional appeal had failed. The Carsons, and now my son, had shown me exactly what they valued: power, status, and money. They had judged me on their terms. Fine. It was time to introduce them to mine. I powered on my computer. The screen illuminated my face in the darkroom. For weeks, my acquisitions team had been finalizing the takeover of a failing mid-cap manufacturing firm. It was a strategic purchase, a distressed asset I could get for pennies on the dollar, restructure, and turn profitable within a year. It was a standard, impersonal business deal. One of a dozen I was working on. The name of the company was Carson Industries. I had, of course, known the company belonged to Amanda's family. But I had compartmentalized it. Business was business, family was family. The deal was orchestrated through layers of lawyers and holding companies. My name appeared nowhere on the initial paperwork. To Richard Carson, the buyer was a faceless investment group from out of state, a vulture fund picking at the bones of his legacy. He had no idea he was negotiating with his son's rustic mother. I pulled up the final signed agreement, the digital ink still fresh. The deal had closed the Friday before the wedding. I was now the sole owner of Carson Industries. Every factory, every patent, every truck, every desk. And, most importantly, every employee contract. I scrolled down to the signature page. There it was, a desperate, spidery scroll: Richard T. Carson, CEO. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated clarity. The tool of my revenge had not just fallen into my lap, I had meticulously, legally, and profitably purchased it. They thought my world was small and insignificant. They had no idea I had just bought theirs. The weight of their silence, their judgment, their laughter began to lift, replaced by the thrilling, terrifying weight of what I was about to do. They wanted me to get used to their culture. Oh, I would. I would introduce them to a culture of accountability. And class was about to be in session. Part 3, The Architect of Consequences. The weekend after my disastrous dinner with Michael was the longest of my life. The fury and the hurt had crystallized into something new, a purpose. I cancelled all my social engagements. I sent my house staff home. I locked myself in my office, and I worked. But this wasn't the kind of work I usually did. This wasn't about profit margins or market projections. This was a deep, forensic dive into the soul of Carson Industries, and by extension, the Carson family itself. I felt like a general preparing for a war that only I knew was coming. My first call was to David Chen, my chief financial officer. David was a quiet genius, a man who could read a balance sheet like a poet reads a sonnet. He was fiercely loyal, having been with me since I was operating out of a cramped office above a laundromat. David, I said, my voice crisp and devoid of emotion. Clear your schedule. I want every single file on the Carson acquisition. I want payroll, expense reports, corporate credit card statements, vendor contracts, personnel files. Everything. I want to know where every single paperclip has gone for the last 5 years. And David? This is priority alpha. For my eyes only. There was a pause on the other end. Everything all right, Helen? He asked, a rare note of personal concern in his voice. Everything is about to be, David, I replied. Send it all to my secure server. The files began to flood in. It was a digital mountain of incompetence and excess. For 48 hours, fueled by black coffee and a righteous, burning anger, I read. And what I found was worse than I could have imagined. Richard Carson wasn't just a bad CEO, he was a parasite, sucking his own company dry. He had 3 executive vice presidents on the payroll who were his golf buddies. Their salaries were astronomical, yet their duties were vaguely defined at best. I saw the expense reports. Thousands of dollars for client dinners, at restaurants I knew were his favorite haunts. Weekly business trips, to a golf resort in Florida. A company lease on a Maserati for his wife, Eleanor, listed as a promotional vehicle. Then I found Amanda's file. She was on the payroll as a marketing consultant. Her salary was $150,000 a year. Her duties, according to her file, involved brand ambassadorship and social media outreach. I cross-referenced her company credit card statements with her Instagram feed. The client meetings in Paris matched her shopping spree at Chanel. The brand strategy session in Aspen perfectly aligned with her ski trip. She was using her father's dying company as her personal piggy bank, funding the very lifestyle she used as a weapon to judge me. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it all took my breath away. These were the people who had called me a fat pig. These were the people who thought I didn't belong. They weren't just cruel, they were thieves, cloaking their grift in the trappings of old money and entitlement. My resolve hardened from steel into diamond. This was no longer just about a personal insult. This was about justice. My plan began to form, not as a messy, emotional outburst, but as a corporate restructuring. It would be clean, legal, and utterly devastating. Firing them would be too simple, too quick. It would be a mercy. No, they needed to understand. They needed to experience the one thing they had never known: consequences. On Sunday evening, I drafted an email. It was sent from the generic account of the new parent corporation, a faceless holding company. The subject line was bland: mandatory post-acquisition integration meeting. The email was sent to a very specific list of recipients: Richard Carson, his 3 golfing VPs, Eleanor Carson's liaison, who managed her company car and expenses, and a handful of other senior managers I had identified as part of Richard's inner circle of enablers. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, in the main boardroom, on the top floor of the Carson Industries building. Their building, which was now, of course, my building. A small, internal conflict flared. Should I tell Michael? A part of me, the mother in me, wanted to warn him, to prepare him for the fallout. But the memory of his dismissive words, "You're being too sensitive," echoed in my mind. He had made his choice. He had chosen to stand with them, to protect their feelings over mine. Informing him now would only give them time to prepare, to lawyer up, to try and spin the narrative. No. They had judged me without knowing me. I would now do them the courtesy of letting them meet the real Helen Sterling all at once. My lawyer, a sharp man named Arthur, did call me, having heard whispers from the Carson side about a hostile new oversight team. "Helen, the standard procedure here is a gentle transition," he advised, his voice cautious. "We don't want to spook the senior staff. It could disrupt operations." "Arthur," I said calmly, "the senior staff are the disruption. Consider this a fumigation. Every action I take will be perfectly legal and in the best interest of the company's long-term health. Do not worry about my methods. Just be ready to handle the paperwork." I hung up, my hand steady. The doubt was gone. The path ahead was clear. That night, for the first time in over a week, I slept. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that comes only when a decision has been irrevocably made. Monday morning, I woke before the dawn. I bypassed my usual sensible cardigans and simple dresses. I went to the back of my closet, to a section I hadn't touched in years. I pulled out a suit. It was a custom-tailored Armani, charcoal gray, with a razor-sharp cut. I paired it with a simple silk shell and my most severe, most powerful pair of black heels. They added 2 inches to my height and 1,000 tons to my presence. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman from the wedding. I saw the woman who had built an empire from nothing. My hair was not in a soft bun but a tight, severe chignon. My face was a mask of calm, corporate control. My emerald eyes were cold and clear. George was waiting for me with the car. He opened the door, and for the first time, he called me Miss Sterling instead of Helen, as if he could sense the shift in the atmosphere. "To the Carson building, George," I said. "You mean the Sterling East Tower, ma'am?" he asked, a hint of a smile in his voice. He had clearly read the internal memo. "For today," I said, "let's still call it the Carson building. I want them to feel at home." As we drove through the city, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, a low-burning pilot light deep inside me, but it was controlled. It was fuel. I wasn't acting out of rage. I was executing a strategy. We pulled up to the gleaming glass tower. The large brass letters above the door still spelled out "See There SON." I walked across the marble lobby, my heels clicking with an unnerving, rhythmic finality. People stared. They saw a woman who radiated power, a woman who clearly did not work there, yet walked as if she owned the place. Which, of course, I did. I didn't need to ask for directions. I had studied the building's blueprints. I walked directly to the private executive elevator, the one that required a keycard I did not have. A nervous-looking security guard hurried over. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, this elevator is for executive use only." I turned my head slowly to look at him. I didn't say a word. I simply held his gaze. He faltered, his eyes widening as he recognized a level of authority he was not equipped to challenge. At that exact moment, my head of security, a large man named Frank who had already been on site for an hour, stepped forward. "She's the new executive," he said, his voice a low rumble. He swiped a MasterCard, and the elevator doors slid open with a soft, deferential ding. I stepped inside. The doors closed, encasing me in a cocoon of polished steel and silence. I looked at my reflection. My face was impassive, my eyes chips of green ice. The elevator ascended, floor by floor, a silent, steady climb to the top. To the boardroom where the Carsons and their cronies were waiting, completely unaware that their judge, jury, and executioner was just seconds away. The doors were about to open. The show was about to begin. Part 4, The Reckoning. The elevator doors opened directly into the executive reception area on the top floor. A harried-looking assistant, no older than 25, looked up from her desk, startled. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a mix of confusion and intimidation. "The boardroom is reserved for a private meeting." "I'm here for that meeting," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I walked past her desk before she could protest, my heels silent on the plush carpeting. The boardroom doors were massive, made of a dark, imposing mahogany. I paused for a single, deep breath, not of hesitation, but of resolve. I pushed one of the heavy doors open and stepped inside. The room went silent. It was exactly as I had pictured. A long, gleaming table dominated the space, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. At one end, a floor-to-ceiling window offered a panoramic view of the city, my city. Seated around the table were the architects of my humiliation. Richard Carson was at the head of the table, looking impatient. His 3 golfing VPs were flanking him, sipping coffee and laughing at some private joke. A few other senior managers were scattered around, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. They all looked up as I entered. And then I saw it. The slow, dawning wave of recognition, confusion, and disbelief that washed over their faces, one by one. I saw Richard Carson's eyes widen. His mouth fell slightly agape. The smug, entitled man from the wedding dissolved before my very eyes, replaced by a man suddenly and terrifyingly out of his depth. He was looking at the rustic woman from the wedding, but he was seeing something else entirely. He was seeing power. I walked calmly to the empty chair at the opposite head of the table. I placed my leather portfolio down with a soft, definitive thud. I did not sit. I remained standing, my hands resting lightly on the back of the chair, and I surveyed them all, my gaze moving from one face to the next. The silence stretched, becoming thick, heavy, and deeply uncomfortable for everyone but me. "Good morning, gentlemen," I began, my voice cool and measured, easily filling the large room. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Helen Sterling. I am the sole proprietor of Sterling Holdings, the firm that completed its acquisition of Carson Industries last Friday. Which means, as of this moment, I am your new boss." A collective intake of breath. One of the VPs spilled his coffee, the dark liquid spreading across the polished table like a stain. Richard Carson's face had drained of all color. He looked like he'd been poleaxed. You're... He stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're the one who bought the company." "I am," I said simply. I let that fact hang in the air for a moment longer before I gestured to the chairs. "Please sit." It was an order, not an invitation. They all sat down as if their strings had been cut. I remained standing. "I called this meeting because we have a lot to discuss," I continued, opening my portfolio. "This is not a transition meeting. It is a restructuring meeting. The culture of excess and mismanagement that has plagued this company for the last decade ends today. My eyes found Richard's. Let's begin with item 1, executive redundancies. I looked down at a sheet of paper, though I had the names memorized. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Davies, Mr. Cho, I said, nodding to the 3 golfing VPs. Your positions as executive vice presidents have been deemed superfluous. Your tenures with Carson Industries are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your offices to collect your personal belongings. Your severance will be the legal minimum as stipulated in your contracts. 3 faces went from shock to ashen white. One of them, Peterson, started to bluster. You can't do this. I have a contract. My head of security, Frank, who had been standing silently by the door, took 1 step into the room. Peterson fell silent. Item 2, I said, not missing a beat. Corporate expense and asset review. My gaze swept across the remaining managers. As of today, all corporate credit cards are frozen. All company car leases are terminated. If you wish to keep your vehicle, you may purchase it at market value. Otherwise, they are to be returned by 5 p.m. this Friday. From now on, all expenses must be pre-approved in writing by Mr. Chen, my CFO. Lavish dinners, first-class flights, and country club memberships are no longer justifiable business expenses. A wave of quiet panic filled the room. I was systematically dismantling their entire world of privilege, piece by painful piece. And finally, I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming even quieter, more personal. Item 3, senior personnel reassignment. I looked directly at Richard Carson. He was sweating now, his expensive suit suddenly looking too tight. Richard, I said, using his first name with deliberate intimacy. The role of CEO is, of course, now redundant. However, I am not terminating your employment. I believe in institutional knowledge. You will be assuming a new role, Transition Manager, Archives. I paused to let the words sink in. You will be responsible for digitizing the last 40 years of the company's paper records. Your new office will be on the sublevel, next to the boiler room. It will be your sole responsibility to ensure a smooth handover of all historical data. You will report directly to me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a man's entire identity being publicly, methodically, and legally erased. His face, once so smug and arrogant at the wedding, had completely collapsed. It was a ruin of slack-jawed shock and impotent fury. You can't, he finally whispered, his voice cracking. This is my family's company. No, I corrected him gently. It was your family's company. You sold it. Now, it's my company. And I do not tolerate pigs feeding at my trough. I used the word deliberately. Pigs. I saw a flicker of understanding and terror in his eyes. He finally made the connection. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Just then, my phone, which I had placed on the table, began to vibrate. The caller ID read, Michael. I let it vibrate, the buzzing sound an insistent, angry insect in the tomb-like silence of the room. I declined the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. The meeting is adjourned, I said. Gentlemen, you have your directives. I turned and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, leaving the wreckage of their careers behind me. I went to what had been Richard Carson's office, a palatial suite with the best view in the building. My staff was already there, boxing up his personal effects and replacing them with mine. My phone rang again. It was Michael. This time, I answered. Mom. What the hell is going on? He yelled, his voice frantic and furious. Amanda is hysterical. She just got an email saying her consulting contract is terminated and her corporate card was declined at Neiman Marcus. Her dad just called her, he said you're firing everyone. What did you do? I sat down in my new leather chair, the one that was still warm from Richard Carson's presence. I swiveled to face the magnificent view of the city. I did what a responsible owner does, Michael, I said, my voice a placid sea after a storm. I'm cleaning house. This isn't cleaning house, this is a massacre. This is about the wedding, isn't it? You're doing this to get back at them. Yes, I said, without a trace of shame. It is. But not in the way you think. And then, with chilling calm, I laid it all out for him. I told him about the debt. About the fake marketing contract. About the Maserati, the golf trips, the theft. And then I told him, word for word, what his wife had said to me. What his father-in-law had said to me. What every single one of their relatives had said to me. I recounted every snide comment, every condescending look, every cruel laugh. They live in a world where they believe they are superior, Michael, I finished, my voice soft but unyielding. A world where kindness is weakness and a person's worth is measured by their designer labels. They judged me. They insulted me. They disrespected me. They did it because they thought I was powerless. They were wrong. This isn't revenge, Michael. This is a correction. A market adjustment. They are finally being valued at their true worth. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. Mom. He whispered, his anger gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. I didn't know. No, I said, a profound sadness in my voice. You didn't. You didn't look. Now, I have to get back to work. I have a company to save. I hung up the phone. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Carsons' world imploded. They had to sell their mansion to cover their personal debts. Eleanor's promotional Maserati was repossessed from the driveway of their country club. Amanda, stripped of her unearned income, had to actually look for a job. The story ripped through their social circle, a delicious piece of gossip about the mighty Carsons being brought low by the quiet, unassuming mother-in-law they had so foolishly scorned. Weeks later, Michael came to my house. Alone. He looked tired. Thinner. He sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where he had defended them, and he cried. He apologized, deeply and sincerely. He told me he and Amanda were in counseling, but he didn't know if it would be enough. He saw her and her family, for who they truly were now. I was so blind, he said, wiping his eyes. Love can do that, I said, and I handed him a cup of tea. It was a start. I didn't need revenge in that loud, screaming, explosive way people imagine. I didn't need to yell or cause a scene. My revenge was quiet. It was structural. I simply took the world they had built on lies and privilege and I held it accountable. I didn't destroy them. I simply removed the scaffolding of other people's money that was holding them up, and I let them collapse under the weight of their own character. Some nights, I sit in my office, in that top-floor suite, and I look out at the city lights. I think about that woman in the simple green dress, standing alone amidst the laughter. And I smile. She didn't need to say a word. Her silence wasn't a weapon. It was a promise. A promise that a reckoning was coming. And I am a woman who always keeps her promises. True strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about knowing your own value, even when others try to tear it down. The Carsons learned that lesson the hard way. They mistook my silence for weakness, and in the end, it was their undoing. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt the quiet satisfaction of proving someone wrong, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served. Until next time. This is the end of story I sent you.